Have you ever looked at the massive investment banks and wondered how they manage billions of dollars in trades without just blowing up? Well, the answer really begins with one simple, powerful concept: delta. You can think of it as the speedometer for market risk, and for any pro trader, it is without a doubt the most important gauge on their dashboard. So let's get into it.
Just think about it for a second. If you're a firm managing literally millions of options contracts, every single tiny tick in the price of a stock is either a potential profit or a potentially devastating loss. How do you possibly control that level of chaos? Well, the answer is you don't guess, you measure. You have to have a tool that quantifies your exact exposure to the market's direction, and that tool is delta. To manage all this risk, traders speak a kind of special language. It's the language of the Greeks. Now, the Greeks are just a set of risk measures. That's it. Think of them like the dashboard in a high-performance car. And if the Greeks are the whole dashboard, delta is that big front-and-center speedometer. It tells you exactly how fast you're going, or in this case, how exposed you are to the market's direction at any given moment.
So, here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to quickly define what delta actually is. Then we'll touch on something called hedging before diving into our main focus: how the pros use delta in the high-stakes world of market making. And finally, we'll see how delta is really just the beginning of the story.
Okay, let's start with the absolute fundamentals. What exactly is delta? And you know what? Forget the complex math for a second, because the concept itself is actually incredibly simple.
So here is the textbook definition. Delta tells you how much an options price is expected to change if the underlying stock moves by $1. It's really just a measure of sensitivity. It basically answers one simple question. If the stock price goes up by $1, what happens to the value of my option?
Let's make this real. Imagine you're looking at a put option, and you see it has a delta of negative 0.10. What does that mean?
Well, that negative sign tells you it makes money when the stock goes down. And the number itself, the 0.10, that's the key. It means for every $1 drop in the stock, this options price is going to go up by about 10 cents. And if the stock rallies $1 instead, the option loses 10 cents. See? It's a direct, predictable relationship.
But, and this is absolutely critical, delta is not a fixed number. It's changing all the time. Think of an options value as a curve on a graph. Delta is just the slope of that curve right at the current stock price. And of course, as the stock price moves up and down, the slope of that curve changes. This dynamic nature is what makes delta so powerful and, honestly, so tricky to manage.
Okay, so if delta measures our directional risk, then the first, most obvious thing we can do with it is control that risk. This is what we call hedging, and it allows traders to build some incredibly cool things called synthetic positions.
The core idea here is that you can treat delta like a Lego block. A stock, for example, always has a delta of 1. A call option might have a delta of, say, 0.5. By combining these different pieces in just the right way, maybe buying one and selling the other, you can actually build a brand new position with a totally different risk profile. You're basically creating a new financial instrument out of thin air.
Here's a classic example. Let's say you sell a call option that has a delta of positive 50. What that means is your position now acts as if you're long 50 shares of the stock. So to neutralize that risk, what do? You just go out and sell 50 shares of the actual stock. The positive 50 delta from the call you sold and the negative 50 delta from the stock you shorted, they cancel each other out perfectly. Your directional risk is now 0. And here's the magic trick. The new risk profile you're left with is identical to having sold a put option. You've synthetically created a short put.
And that brings us to the heart of this whole thing, that idea of being delta neutral or having zero directional risk. That is the absolute #1 core principle for how professional market makers at the world's biggest investment banks run their entire business. This is where delta stops being just a simple metric and becomes the engine of a massive profit center.
Now first, it's really important to understand that not all banks do the same thing. On one hand, you have commercial banks. They use derivatives to hedge their own risks, like the big pile of loans they've made. But investment banks, they usually act as market makers. They're the intermediaries. Their goal isn't to hedge their own business, it's to make it easy for everyone else to trade. And they make their money from the tiny difference between the buying and selling price called the bid-ask spread.
This quote from a research paper on market making pretty much says it all. The prime directive, the #1 rule for a market maker, is to keep their delta as close to 0 as humanly possible at all times. They start the day with 0 risk and they fight tooth and nail to stay there all day long.
Because this is their entire business model. A market maker isn't a speculator. They're not betting that the market will go up or down. You can think of them as the house in a casino. They just want to facilitate the game for everyone else. Their profit comes from capturing that tiny bid-ask spread, but they do it millions and millions of times. And by staying direction neutral, or delta neutral, they can focus only on earning that spread, no matter which way the market decides to go.
So this creates this constant, frantic cycle of activity all day. So imagine a customer, maybe a hedge fund, buys a call option from the bank. Okay, the bank just sold that call, so their book now has a negative delta. An alarm bell immediately goes off. They are now short the market. Instantly, their trading algorithms or a human trader will jump into the stock market and buy the exact number of shares needed to bring their delta right back to zero. And this just happens over and over and over again. A customer trades, they hedge. Another trade, another hedge. It never stops.
Now, this leads to a really important question. If these banks are constantly hedging their directional risk back to zero, does that mean their portfolio is completely safe? Is it risk-free? Well, the answer, as you can probably guess, is a big no.
You see, delta is the first and definitely the most important risk, but it's only one piece of a much larger, much more complicated puzzle. Being delta neutral is not the same thing as being risk neutral. This pulls back the curtain on a hidden risk in the market maker's world. See, hedging isn't some continuous force field. It's more like taking a series of snapshots. And between each hedge, there's this tiny window of time where you're exposed. Now, most of the time, that's fine. But what if the market makes a huge, violent move between one hedge and the next? A book that was perfectly delta neutral a second ago can suddenly be facing massive losses. This is called the risk of discrete hedging, and it's something professional risk managers are constantly worried about.
And this is what brings us to the other Greeks. If delta is your directional risk, then gamma is the risk that your delta will change on you. It's the risk of your risk. Vega is your exposure to changes in market volatility, which is a huge deal in options. And Theta is the slow, constant, predictable decay of an option's value as time just marches on. A true market maker has to juggle all of these all at the same time. We'll definitely dive deeper into these in future explainers.
So let's bring this all together. Here's the crucial point. Delta is the foundation. It is the #1 essential moment-to-moment tool for managing which way the market is going. But for a professional trader, it's only the very first step. It's just the first of many risks they have to measure, manage, and balance every single second of every trading day. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. We usually think of the market as this big battle between bulls and bears, right? People betting it'll go up and people betting it'll go down. But now you know there's this other massive force at play, market makers, who have zero opinion on direction and who are constantly forced to buy when the market drops and sell when it rallies just to keep their delta at zero. How does knowing that force is always there change your view of the market?